I think I just got the the announcement that the recording was in progress, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to say thanks to a few folks before we get started tonight. I'll give the group just a 10-second rundown of what the evening is going to look like to start, though, which is we have 11 of our 13 students with us tonight. They have been given the reading order. They're all going to read for between 6 and 7 minutes tonight. So we'll get to hear a terrific sampling of the work that's been done. And we'll imagine the applause resonating from the Zoom rooms all across the country. We'll get to all of that in just 1 second. I want to say first, thanks to the friends and family members and other folks who are here tonight to hear the readings. I know that many of the students are feeling a little bit nervous. They're a little bit anxious about this, but I'm sure that it does them well to see familiar faces and friends in the group. So thank you for coming. I want to say thanks too to Jenny. I did not pay her for that very kind introduction she gave me, but I'll take it all the same. The feelings are all mutual. You know that, Jenny. Thanks to everyone at the Loft for helping to facilitate this and for supporting this program throughout the year. And speaking of years, what a year we have had. I'm looking at all these familiar faces, these folks that I've seen, whatever it is, 36 times, I think, in our Zoom room over the course of the last calendar year. And frankly, I'm just kind of blown away by the work that has been done, the learning that has been done, the support that has been shared and given. It's not a small thing that every week we showed up together to support each other, to help each other. And I'll tell you this plainly, friends in the cohort, that I'm certain that I have learned just as much as you all have this year. And it's been an honor to become friends with you, to learn from you, and as much as anything, to be inspired by you. The work is incredible. I'm in the middle of reading some of the books now. It never fails or ceases to blow my mind how much these books develop over the course of the year, and you all have simply knocked it out of the park. So thank you for that. And I'm sure that we'll see evidence of that knocking it out of the park time and time again tonight. As I mentioned earlier, the group has been given the order in which they'll read. I'll introduce each person right before they go. So I'll give a brief 30-second introduction before they read. They will then read, and then we'll move on to the next person. So I think that covers everything, and we'll just go ahead and get started. I'm delighted to introduce our first reader of the night. I see him up in the corner of the Zoom room here. Every year, a couple of students distinguish themselves for their kindness and devotion to the group. And our first reader, Daniel Hertz, was one of those people this year. His charming disposition, very sensible approach to his own work and to the groups made him a pleasure to be around from day one. In his novel, Roger Dodger, a story about a child's calamitous entry into the world and the amazing, tender, and complicated years that follow him to kindergarten, is one I won't soon forget. It's a funny book, a sweet book, and an important book, and one that made me finally want to be a better person. Our first reader tonight, Daniel Hertz.
Thank you, Peter, for everything you've done this year. Thanks to my classmates, Jennifer from the Loft, my wife, Nikki, and then, of course, everyone who's come out to support us tonight. Really appreciate it. My book, as Peter mentioned, follows the life of a neurodivergent child from birth to 6 years old. Rather than seen as someone with deficits, Roger Dodger is portrayed as an inspiring child with unique skills and talents. This scene takes place in the last third of the book when Roger Dodger is in kindergarten. The audience in the packed school auditorium quieted down in anticipation of the winter concert. The kindergarten teacher announced that their class would be performing the song Puff the Magic Dragon, and that the masks they're wearing were made by the students in their art class. Just as they rehearsed, the students filed up the steps to the stage. A shout came from the back of the auditorium. "Go, Roger Dodger, that's my son." Roger Dodger stopped on the top of the first step when he heard his dad's voice. His head twisted around to see where it came from. The bright stage light shone in his eyes. He teetered on the edge of the step and flailed his arms to try to maintain his balance. There were gasps from the audience. His grandmother in the front row darted in his direction, but the teacher was already there to steady him. Roger Dodger continued onto the stage. Each student found their spot on the masking tape. The teacher gave them an encouraging smile. "You're doing great." The teacher moved to the piano bench and played the introduction to the song. They sang the first verse loud and clear and made all the hand signs she taught them. Several of the audience members hummed along and swayed to the music. More of them joined in on the second verse. When they got to the end of the last verse, the teacher stood up from behind the piano bench. The class stared at her in anticipation. She raised her arms. Roger Dodger took a step forward. He wound his arms around in big circles. The teacher snapped her arms down. The students roared their best dragon sound. When they finished, Roger Dodger was still spinning his arms. The audience quieted down and watched. A tiny squeak came out of his mouth. Several audience members guffawed. Some fifth graders in the back row cheered. The teacher gave the signal. All the students filed toward the steps and off the stage. Except Roger Dodger. He was the only one left on stage. His arms spun around again. The teacher stayed in front of the stage. She offered her hand to guide him to his seat. His arms kept twirling. Another squeak came out of his mouth. The "Sock It To Me, Baby" ringtone boomed out from his dad's cell phone and resonated around the hushed auditorium. He fumbled around in his pocket and silenced it. Sorry about that, folks." Several of the other students howled with laughter. Sounds of "shh" could be heard from the teachers. The other audience members gaped at Roger Dodger and waited. He sat down in the front of the stage. His legs hung over the edge. He ripped off his mask and threw it to the floor. The fifth grader who bumped into him on the first day of school yelled out, "Put the mask back on, kid." A few of his classmates joined him in the laughter. His teacher motioned for the student to switch to a seat closer to her. Roger Dodger closed his eyes and rocked back and forth. The teacher reached out her hand toward him. His grandmother leaned forward and whispered to her, "Please, give him a moment." The teacher backed up. His grandmother started to sing in a soft tone. The itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout. Roger Dodger's eyes popped open. When she finished singing the words "water spout," she raised her hands into a claw position and opened her mouth wide. She scrunched up her face into a scary expression. Roger Dodger hopped to his seat and screamed at the top of his lungs. The piercing screech filled the auditorium. The people in the first two rows covered their ears. Several members of the audience shrieked. A man in the front row held his hand on his heart. His dad's yell could be heard throughout the auditorium. "That's me boy, Roger Dodger." The audience erupted in applause. Roger Dodger took a deep bow and walked off the stage.
Thank you, Daniel. That was fabulous. It's always a little bit sad that we can't hear the actual applause. I'm sure it was resonant, Daniel, just like Roger Dodger's scream. Our second reader tonight is Rebecca Higgins. Some novels rely on expert plotting, others on dynamic characters. Some of the best offer both. So it is with Rebecca Higgins's Found and Lost, a story about what happens when people go missing and when they're found again. In this page turner, there's plot twists galore, but also a complex set of characters who have to navigate a world that's been particularly unkind to them. The result is people your heart will break for, but whose determination and resolve will inspire you. I've been impressed by Rebecca from the first time we spoke, and a year later, I see bright things in her future. Let's welcome her tonight. Rebecca?
Thank you, Peter. I also want to thank all my friends and family and everyone in the online cohort for being so supportive during this process. My novel, Found and Lost, follows Maria and her family, her husband, David, and their 7-year-old daughter, Justice, after Maria was kidnapped for several years. It follows the 3 of them as they rebuild their lives and come together as a family. I'll be reading from chapter 14, in which before this, Maria is returned home and reunited with her family. But when she was playing with her daughter, Justice, it triggered a painful memory for her and she had a panic attack. The scene I'll be reading from is her waking up after the attack. Maria wakes up, her mind still in a dream that slips away from her. The ceiling above her is not paneled and plain. Instead, it's a constellation of texture. She can't believe she's actually finding the popcorn ceiling beautiful. Blankets wrap around her, holding her in the warmth, and she turns over to find that David isn't there. She wonders if he just got up to pee, but reaching her hand on the other side of the bed, it's still cold. He hasn't been there at all. Maybe he was afraid to lay next to her, afraid to touch her and trigger her again. Maria hates how he looked at her, his eyes cast down and lips pursed, like she was a vase handled by careless movers. She would have to tell him that she was fine and that yesterday was just as he had told her earlier, a long day. David's clock on his dresser tells her it's 3:38 in the morning in red boxy numbers. Getting up, pain shoots through her leg with each step she takes. Somehow she forces him to carry her into the hallway. Carefully, she opens the door to Justice's room. A star nightlight next to the bed gives the room a soft glow. Sleeping in her bed with her arms stretched overhead, Justice's deep breaths sound like an ocean, reminding Maria of the gentle receding and rising of waves. She leans her head against the door frame and watches her daughter dream. Then she sees several boxes of cookies next to the bed, and a soft smile escapes Maria's lips. It sounds off to her, this laugh, like there's cobwebs and dust in the place that the laugh comes from. After watching Justice for several moments, Maria turns back to the dark hall. She presses on the guest room door that opens with a groan. Squinting, she tries to make sense of the darkness. If David is here, she wishes he also slept with a nightlight so she could see him easier. But she hears a snore, not from within this room and too deep to be Justice's. Past the kitchen and into the dining room, Maria finds the culprit. David sits on the couch with his chin pressing into his chest. His laptop is open on his lap, but starts to hang over his knees. She grabs the laptop and places it next to him on the couch. Huh, David says as his eyes open. When his eyes open further, they only widen on her in front of him. She wonders if his vision is still blurry from sleep, but his eyes don't move. He looks as if he's being haunted.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. One of the things that was just fabulous about this year, and you'll pick up on this as we go through the course of the evening, is just the diversity in the storytelling. There's so many different types of novels that were written this year. And it was just, I think one of the true pleasures of this year was that diversity and how much we all learned from each other. Our next reader this evening probably joined us from more different geographical locations than the rest of the group combined. I mention this because Amelia Burgess, the author of For the Land, seems to inhabit the whole world. This book is evidence of that. It spans history and genre and idea the way any great historical novel does, but there's a speculative element that's almost impossible to describe as well. With roots in the women of the Bible, the climate, and good old-fashioned marriage and family, it's the kind of book that might have imploded in the hands of someone less capable and confident. Instead, it fascinates and beguiles in the best of ways. Folks, please welcome Amelia Burgess.
Thank you, Peter. I think Peter means I made it all up. And thank you, everybody, for the support and the learning all year. And my husband, who gave up Tuesday nights, he's listening right now. This is I guess you'd say an illumination or a retelling of a story in the first book of the Bible or the Torah. It's about Rachel and Leah and Jacob and their co-wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. And I am reading from the first chapter. Leah was lagging behind the sheep. She did not like this time of year, late winter, drab and gray. She was trapped in the winter camp for the dirty mess of shearing and birthing. The buried roundhouse, so exciting and cozy when they'd arrived, was now cramped and dank and smelly. The songs had been sung, the stories had been told, she had learned enough. She sighed when her father began, or her mother, tales of the ancestors, the miraculous Abraham and his brother Nahor, her great-grandfather, who built this very roundhouse. It was too wet for burning. Weeks ago, she had finished her winter chores, smoldering down the bereft foliage of the strawberry and onion to ashy earth. Now the ewes were pregnant and clumsy with wool. She walked behind the flock to mind the stragglers, but also to watch the underbrush, to look for need, for the land's hunger for flame. While her younger sister Rachel mastered the family flock, Leah was a burner, not a shepherdess. The burn teams came through every year, clearing paths and pastures, grooming forests for hunting, promoting fruit-bearing bushes and basket grasses, making fire breaks. They watched the forests. Where did the lightning strike and what happened after? How far did the fire go and which direction? The burners knew the land better even than her parents, who knew every rivulet and rock in their circuit, who could give directions from memory, tree by tree, the lands in the north and the south. But the burners could look at a spot and say what used to be there, what would be there in 10 years, what should be done now to make it useful. And they wandered far and wide, to the ocean in the west and the mountains in the east. They moved fast. They did not have to stop to watch sheep eat. They also fought wildfires. It was the most exciting thing, running toward the flame, making backburns, digging fire trenches. Leah dreamed of it. She wanted to go back to the tree that had recently been struck by lightning. She had gone as often as she could, watching the vein of ember hollow out its trunk, until she could crawl in, sit in the warm ashes, look up at the dying fire. She had burned a fire break around the tree, though probably it was not needed given the damp, the daily fog, and the frequent rain. Thinking of the tree reminded her of the strange man she had found in the woods. He had not presented to Laban as she had suggested. She should go today to see if he was gone. She could slip into the wood, check on her tree, look for his hut, and meet Rachel at the well before the sheep were done watering. The hired shepherds would already be there waiting and would remove the well stone. The well was just at the edge of the wood. She had time. The tree had stopped burning. Although a large space was hollowed out at the base, rising in a smooth black cone, there was more wood left than not, and the tree would survive. It made her smile, but she had to move. She did not want to be scolded for shirking and abandoning the animals that were their livelihood. She could move as quickly and invisibly as a deer, and she returned to the place where she'd met the stranger. His shelter was there, his pack was there, but he was not. There were clear foot trails to the river and up the hill through the shrubbery to the well. Leah scowled and followed the path upward. She came out of a stand of blackberry, taller than she was, too tall, and saw her sister in the man's embrace. It was like he was eating her. He let go and stepped back, cupping her face, and her sister looked up and stumbled and fell to one knee, tripping on her veil as she rushed to cover her red face. She looked around wildly and saw Leah, eyes wide, and rose to run toward her. Leah caught her in her arms, and they both fell to the ground, Rachel breathing heavily. The man stood, one hand shading his eyes, watching them, and the young shepherds huddled together, the youngest one crying, the oldest one clutching a rock with red knuckles, jaw tight. They were local boys, younger than Rachel, hired by Laban. "My cousin, tell your father I am here," the man called. "I will water your sheep." His voice boomed across the meadow. He let his cloak fall, and he moved to the well stone. Leah hugged her sister and picked her up, looking at her face, which was now streaked with tears, although she made no sound. "Come, we'll go to our father," she called to the boys. "Mind the sheep and mind yourselves. I'll send my father." The sisters' faces were mirror images of each other, except for their coloring. Rachel, the younger, had big dark eyes, rich crow feather hair, and sun-dark skin. With deep rose cheeks and lips, she was beautiful. No one had ever seen a person like Leah. She had skin the color of a white sky and twisting hair the color of grass seed. Her eyes were pale gray, pink rimmed. She was tall and thin, and she kept her hair and skin covered from the sun and strangers' eyes. Leah was like a little mother to her sister, protecting her and showing her off. They screamed and ran and danced together, but they liked different things. Rachel would sit around the fire in the weaving tent, around the cooking stove, listening. She liked herding the sheep and the goats, who were docile and placid in her care. Leah had no patience for that. She could tolerate the shepherding, but really she liked to chase fires, light fires, dig fire trenches, burn underbrush, clear land, and generally think about fire. She was never interested in very much else. She could track and hunt, moving silently through the woods. She could smell fire, smell lightning strikes, smell rain before it came. They were different.
Thanks, Amelia. I'll never tire of novels that capture the complicated ways our families shape and misshape us. Our next writer, Roberta Myers, has written a searching, multifaceted coming-of-age story set partly in the 1980s, but one that also circles back to the tumultuous 60s. Some of the themes we encounter along the way include what we inherit from our parents, how society's upheaval comes to our homes and lives, and how we might stand ready against both. Hold Me Up to the Sun delves deeply and intimately into the lives of its mother-daughter protagonists and finds answers to these complicated questions in the most honest and interesting of ways. No surprise, given its author, who seemed able to see to the quick of every moral question we came up against this year. Roberta, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. And I want to thank the Loft and Peter and the online cohort for a wonderful year. And I'm going to begin at chapter 1 at the beginning of the novel. We moved fast and level, west and north, away from the heat and humidity of Minnesota. We traveled on I-94, a rubber band stretched over the upper Midwest. We would shoot straight across North Dakota and make one right turn at Glendive, Montana. Steve drove and Grandma was in the seat beside him. I sat behind her at a right angle to the front of the RV with a view out a long window opposite me. My road trips were always sideways. Don't call it an RV, Margaret, Grandma told me. It's a motorhome. It's self-contained. An RV could be anything. Self-contained was the preferred state. I hated the RV. Grandma always started talking at Fargo. I knew, like I knew the road, that she would not stop talking until Bismarck. 200 miles. I never heard my grandmother talk like she did on the stretch of the interstate highway between Fargo and Bismarck. The earth must have spoken to her, or the wind, or some force of past misery. She knew the towns by who was buried in their cemeteries. She called off their names, the names of dead relatives as we passed the signs for the towns, many of them so far in the distance we couldn't see them, or maybe they no longer existed, except for the cemeteries. I was born just outside Fargo on the Minnesota side, Grandma started. It was her family story and ended with the Second World War. 200 miles of loss and poverty and aspirations stopped by circumstance. In Grandma's story, everything unhappy in life was due to bad luck. In Grandma's stories, an entire decade took the blame. It was the 30s, dry weather and greedy bankers. Dad lost the farm. Then we scattered, all of us, across North Dakota. We came out on the same train. That's the last time we were together, when we got off that train. Mom and Dad kept the little ones with them, but the rest of us had to take care of ourselves. Dad was a farmer, but there was no work on the farms. Plenty of people were already looking for work. Everyone had lied to us. We heard about each of the 8 brothers and sisters, at least as many as Grandma could get in before we got to Bismarck, where the story stopped. Her family never made it past Bismarck. The RV trip was a bloated bomb dropped into the middle of my already confusing life. The 3 of them, my mother, Grandma, and Aunt Betsy, sprang it on me the day before when I walked through the apartment door. It was the last day of my junior year in high school. I came home that afternoon, plans of my own, to hear their voices from behind the apartment door. My mother was on the couch, Grandma next to her. Betsy stood with a coffee pot in her hand. Betsy was the ringleader. Margaret, you look changed every time I see you, Grandma said, getting up from the couch. You look good too, Grandma. My mother looked away. Go ahead, tell her, Nadine, Betsy said. She's barely in the door, Betsy. I'll do it then. Your mother is due to check in at the rehab hospital tomorrow morning. I'm taking her. You're going with Grandma and Steve on an RV trip. The three of them looked at me smiling, waiting for my agreement. Scent from a crabapple tree came through the front window. I smelled coffee, lemon from the pie on the table, hand lotion and soap, the smells of being cared for. My mother's body, sitting on the couch, was folded in on itself so that she was mostly her head. Auburn hair, blue eyes, and her face, round and smiling, rose-colored with excitement. Her face told lies about her health. Grandma was caught mid-stance, trying to come toward me, and she stood without much substance. Her hair sprung in coils from her scalp, the color of boiled meat. Betsy had my mother's features, but the edges were honed, sharp angles at the end of her nose and the corners of her mouth, and her eyes were the color of metal in the parts that should have been the deepest blue. I'm not going. I can stay here by myself. From outside, I heard kids, their voices flowing, running or on bikes. The windows were open. If I started yelling, they would hear me. In the apartment, it was always this way. Someone would hear me. My mother looked down at her lap. Look, Margaret, don't be stubborn, Betsy said. You're overreacting and making this worse for all of us. I thought if I persisted, my mother's head would get lower and lower until her chin was nearly on her chest. That was not good for her neck. It would be my fault, whatever happened to her neck. There was always the neck. It will only be for a month, Margaret, my mother said. As soon as I'm better, I'll buy you a plane ticket home. You know I want to stay here this summer, work at the drugstore. I have so much stuff I want to do this summer. Get your bag packed, Betsy said. What? I'm leaving today? This is for the best, Margaret, my mother said. My fury flashed at them. They must have seen it, but carried on, disguised as pleasant women. We can't leave a teenager alone in an apartment, Betsy said. That is just the way it is.
Thank you, Roberta. Our next student tonight probably faced more obstacles this year than any of us. And yet still she was prolific to the point of absurdity, to say nothing of being one of the most generous readers in the cohort. Melissa Davey has written a book called Uncatalogued Materials, which takes us back to 1980s Boston as an intelligent, curious young woman takes her first steps into the world of adults. What she discovers there is love in its many forms, a world in political upheaval, and a library that's the perfect vessel for her coming of age. By turns smart, fascinating, and cautionary, here's a novel that plumbs a whole cross-section of American society and leaves the reader wiser for the experience. Melissa? Don't forget to unmute yourself, Melissa.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this class has been a great experience because of the participants. Everyone has shown insight and compassion in commenting on other people's work, and the stories people have brought to our workshop are fascinating and diverse. I hope we can find a way to stay in touch. I've been so grateful for Peter Geye's compassionate, enthusiastic teaching and leadership. If anyone is looking for an example to follow in the writing life, he has to be it. So I don't need to describe the book, but let's see. All books in the library, which are not needed immediately in this library, are moved to an endless holding tank of uncatalogued materials deep in its basement in a place called D North. And that area, which in a person might be roughly equated to the subconscious, is managed by a single wizard-like fellow named Max. Here, I will read you a little scene between Carrie and Max, It's when Carrie is collecting memories of all the people she works with by taking pictures of them and trying to capture the best possible vision of each person that still feels authentic. One of the people she finds hardest to photograph is Max. She's just returned from a trip with her friend Daphne to Provincetown, where she was haunted by Max in a sort of waking dream. Unable to get him out of her mind, she brings him back some saltwater taffy and tries to sneak up behind him to take his picture. At lunchtime, she stole down to D North with her camera, a book, and the box of taffy for Max. She opened the door very quietly and crept up behind him on soundless steps, focusing on the curls at the back of his head. He was sitting at his desk, facing away from her, reading a book. She could hear Boz Scaggs' old song, Low Down, playing softly from the tape player. Caroline, he said, leaning forward to turn off the music. Damn it, Max. He turned around, fixing his dark brown eyes on her. Did you really think I didn't know you were here? At the sight of him, she found she really wanted to run up and hug him. She felt a sudden rush of warmth and familiarity, as if she had actually spent the weekend with him instead of Daphne. How strange, she thought. He can't possibly be feeling this. He didn't really see me over the weekend. I wanted to take your picture, silly. He stood up and came over to take the camera out of her hands. She went still, letting him take it. The warmth of his hands touched hers exactly as they had in the waking dream. She realized that his hands had always felt just this way to her. He showed no reaction and was studying the camera. Do you use this for your candid camera portraits in the book? Usually. He had shaven. There was no stubble on his cheeks. She wondered if he had ever come to work without shaving to give her an impression or memory like the one she'd had in the dream. You seem to be studying me lately, my dear. No more than usual, Max. Necrophilia, Caroline. With this, he handed the camera back to her, touching her hand again just for a moment. Her perception was mingled with curiosity about whether he was feeling it as well or not. Was he too proud to admit it, or just used to this kind of thing? He cut the tension with a laugh. Turn the high beams off, please. You're going to drill a hole in me. What do you mean, necrophilia? It comes from two Greek roots, nekros meaning death, and philia. But why say it to me? Because you can never capture life in a single photograph. What you take will always be a distortion. You're taking a living, changing, beating thing and trying to turn it into something still, a slice of life, a frozen moment. You're taking something alive and making it into something dead. You love this work and you're absorbed in it, hence necrophilia. I see, she said skeptically. She didn't like this idea at all. That's not what most people mean by that word, you know. It's related, said Max as he sat down again. Anyway, all art seeks to capture life. It's just when it becomes obsessive, it's not good for you. He took out a stack of well-worn tarot cards. As he spoke, he riffled through them thoughtfully. That's all I'm saying. You try to hold on to life too much. You sink into it and try to grasp it as you're going through. It kills you and you kill it. Let the stream carry you a little. Don't keep taking pictures of life, just live it. Okay, Max. Carrie handed him the box of saltwater taffy, making sure her hands wouldn't touch his. These are for you. Max seemed genuinely pleased, though she thought he should be more surprised. He removed the plastic bag full of milky candies from the box. These take me back to my childhood. Are they from P-Town? How'd you know? Just a guess, said Max. Did you go? Yes, last weekend, she said sullenly, almost adding, with Daphne, but it wasn't his business. Did you have a good time? Max removed a lime green saltwater taffy from its waxed paper, popping it into his mouth. Then he held out the bag in her direction. She shook her head. She hated saltwater taffy. I hope that stuff doesn't take your fillings out, but I knew you'd like it. At this point, it'll probably take the teeth as well and put me out of my misery, he said cheerfully. By the way, I wish I could have gone to Provincetown last weekend. Laura made me clean the garage. You did come, thought Carrie, whether I wanted you to or not. Instead, she said abruptly, listen, I've got to get back to work. See you later. Ciao, Bella, he said, turning back to his desk. As she bounded up the stairs 2 at a time, she could see him out of the corner of her eye, settling back into his chair and reaching for a pink candy as Lowdown started up again.
Thank you, Melissa. Our next reader, Nicole Swenson, brings savvy and intelligence and a real sense of intrigue to her genre-crossing novel, The Secret Girl. It's the story of a young woman grappling with a traumatic past while she works on a future that's meaningful and important. What she discovers is that despite her best intentions, the world often intercedes. Cults, communes, the FBI, a lost childhood that turns out to be not everything she remembers it being. This book has something for everyone. It's riveting and whip smart to boot, which is no surprise at all, given its author, who, like her protagonist, juggles her career in her writing life like a Cirque du Soleil performer. Nicole, your turn.
Thank you, Peter. I just want to echo my classmates' sentiments of gratitude toward Peter and each other for all of your encouragement and generosity this year. I will definitely miss our Tuesdays quite a bit. As Peter mentioned, my main character, Claire, is a psychology grad student who spent 4 years of her childhood living on a hippie commune with her mother, until a fire tragically killed everyone except for her and another boy named Matthew. When 2 FBI agents come knocking on her door asking for her help with their investigation into a cult that they've linked to this commune, her whole world is upended and the secrets from her past are at risk of being exposed. This is Claire's story of discovering how strong she is, as well as an exploration of how trauma impacts different people. I'll be reading from the beginning of a scene where Claire is traveling with the FBI agents to interview her long-lost friend Matthew's adoptive parents. We arrived 25 minutes early for our 11 o'clock a.m. appointment with Spencer and Elena Gardner at their La Jolla home. It was Saturday and traffic was light on the drive down from the west side. While Rivera and Barnes prepped me for the meeting from the front seats of a black sedan, I stared out the rear passenger window at the Pacific Ocean, surprised by the quaintness of the beach towns in South Orange County. La Jolla was an exclusive, affluent town just north of downtown San Diego. The Gardners neighborhood, while modest when compared to the many large cliffside homes with ocean views, was buzzing with families packing their SUVs with golf clubs and surfboards. Matthew's adoptive parents were clearly well off, and it was difficult to imagine the trouble he caused in this gated community. The security guard had called up to the house, so Matthew's parents were already at the front door waiting for us when Rivera pulled the sedan up to the immaculate 2-story Spanish-style home. Spencer and Elena Gardner both appeared to be in their late 50s and were dressed like they took advantage of Nordstrom's personal shopper service, in expensive but classic garments that never went out of style. "Please come in," Mrs. Gardner said, shaking each of our hands but hurrying us inside. Elena's made coffee. Mr. Gardner offered to pour our cups as we made ourselves comfortable in the formal sitting room. Like the clothes they wore, the interior of the Gardner's home looked timeless. Staple pieces and earth tones were accented by throw pillows and rugs that gave the space pops of color. The house gave me comfortable coastal vibes. "Thank you for seeing us over the weekend, Mr. and Mrs. Gardner," Agent Rivera said once introductions had been made and everyone was settled. I was there to listen, a silent observer primarily. Rivera thought my presence would be comforting to the pair. She feared they might be defensive about the fact that their son was a person of interest related to a series of crimes. But my interpretation was that Spencer and Elena were happy to speak with us if it meant that Matthew was still alive and we could bring him back to them. It also became apparent right away that I would need to be flexible regarding my proposed role. "You're her?" Mrs. Gardner asked me. "Lyric?" "I go by Claire now, but yes." "We changed Matthew's last name to Gardner, obviously, but we thought it would be an easier transition if he could keep Matthew," she said. "Maddie used to talk about you," Mr. Gardner said, his expression pained. I asked him if he wanted to sign up for junior lifeguards one summer, and he said no, that he only really went on trips to the beach because you liked them so much. I felt intense aches of my own at the thought that Mr. Gardner was used to speaking of his son in the past tense, but smiled at the memory. For the past 3 years, I've been living a few miles from the same beach, but haven't made it further west than the 3rd Street Promenade. And even that was just to show my parents when they visited. We were close back then. Happy, I said, my voice trailing off. More memories of the day I met my own adoptive parents, and the day they moved me into their sweet Portland cottage suddenly flooded my mind. It was the first time I had my own room, which Mom and Dad had filled with books. There was a desk under the window housing a teal iMac, but the rest of the room was bare. We weren't sure what you would like, so we figured we could all go to the mall tomorrow, they said. Looking around the Gardner's home, hearing their kind voices, it seemed Matthew and I had both been lucky to find the families we did. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you, Nicole. Good war novels are difficult for the same reason wars themselves are. They're usually morally ambiguous. Certainly they're complicated, and they usually include characters that we can't always make sense of. Daniel Trusillo's epic and intimate novel of the Iraq War, called Halas, is born of his experience as a service member, but seemingly as much by his unending empathy and deep wisdom. It tells the story of an American soldier with great clarity and depth, and of an Iraqi family torn apart by the war. This novel is heart-wrenching. It's one that moved and fascinated me with equal frequency, and it's one I think that's bound to occupy spaces in conversations that include Tim O'Brien and Kevin Powers. Dan?
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for the really kind introduction. And many thanks to the fellow workshoppers and also to Peter. It's been an absolute pleasure every single Tuesday this year. And I have to also thank my wife, Nicola, and my kids, Paul and Alma, for giving me the space to actually do this every Tuesday. So yeah, just many thanks to all of you and to all of you that are in the audience as well. So the section that I'm going to read, the scene I'm going to read is actually from the middle of the book. And it focuses on First Lieutenant Ed Currier, one of the two main characters in the book, as he's trying to reach his girlfriend back at home. His girlfriend's name is Sarah, at a morale, welfare, and recreation trailer. And so he's got a little bit of time off while he's on a US base. And so he's trying to reach back home. It'll be about a half hour, the civilian said without looking up. A half hour to remember what home felt like. A half hour to wonder if Sarah emailed him. One more half hour lost in Iraq. Currier leaned against the wall of the trailer and looked around, trying to calm his mind. The trailer smelled like a crew of construction workers hanging out in the lumber aisle of Home Depot after a day's labor. Currier took Sarah's perfume letter out of his pocket, carefully removed the golden cross she taped to it, then folded the letter and hid it away, afraid to let the smell of Sarah be taken over by the stink of soldiering. With his other hand, Currier took off the stainless steel chain that held his military-issued dog tag around his neck and stared at the artifact. More useful for romanticizing being a soldier than actually IDing his remains, the tag was indented with 3 facts. Admittedly, they were the only aspects he was confident hadn't changed about him: his name, his social security number, and the most useful piece of information, his blood type. Currier had admitted getting a religious affiliation pressed into the metal. He looked at the tag's twin, strung into the weave of his right bootlace, and smiled at the macabre thought that one of the tags would hopefully do the trick post-roadside bomb blast. Threading the chain through the bale, Currier let Sarah's cross slide down against the tag. Currier, the red-haired civilian called his name. Currier snapped the bead chain closed and slipped it on. There was an email waiting for him. It was a mismatch of glib sentences collected into a feelingless paragraph. Sarah ended it with a simple dash and an S. It hit Currier with the same force that a message full of real sentiment would have, but in the exact opposite way. He looked around at the soldiers writing or calling loved ones, then checked his watch. It was just after 2 p.m. in Iraq, 6 a.m. in Pittsburgh. Currier abandoned the computer and put his name on the list for phones. At his turn, He tapped the digits of an international calling card and then Sarah's phone number. There was no ring. His breath caught when her voice said hello, but it was her voicemail. He hung up, dialed, and listened again. Each iteration was a painful sequence of too many digits, and each time Sarah's voicemail whittled away at Courier's calling card minutes. On the third try, he left a message. He told her he missed her. He said sorry, apologizing for calling so early in the morning. Stuck in Iraq, Courier was utterly disconnected. He wanted to know if the relationship was more than just the fantasies he conjured when he was laying in his cot, unable to sleep. It was those awake dreams that tethered him to home. But in this moment, Courier felt more distant from his family and friends than he could ever explain. He missed Sarah with a frenzied awkwardness that felt desperate. The overhead fluorescent lights illuminated crude graffiti scribbled onto the plywood cubic walls. Courier read, "Matt was here. I banged your sister on R&R. FTA." Neat rows of slanted capital letters caught his eye. The letters reminded Courier of knives, the tips of their blades aligned. It was a poem. Courier sounded the words in his mind, anxious to fight the frustration that hung leaden in his gut. In the dark depths of solitude, I search for meaning and find you. The words tugged at him like a safety line attached to solid ground. My heart is filled with gratitude. I remember, I continue. He leaned toward the plywood and began whispering out loud. With dreams and hopes we strive, we see a purpose in unwritten rules. In this life, we can choose to be truly unconquerable souls. Courier felt his chest expand as a flood of emotion coursed through him. There was pain, but also hope. It was as if a boundary dissolved. "Lieutenant Courier," the civilian said, "time's up." Courier took the letter from Sarah out of his pocket, flipped it over, and copied the poem before heading back outside, back into the all-consuming conflict.
It's tremendous, Dan. Thank you. Of all the experiences I carry in my own life, none is as indelible as being a parent to young children. In our next novel, a book called What It Takes to Feel by Aaron F. Halas, motherhood is the primary condition of its protagonist. A source of joy, of course, but also one that has altered her understanding of who she is and who she wants to be. In searching for answers to those questions, Marie, the mother, must confront her health, both physical and psychic, her marriage, her art, and finally her family's past to find answers. This is a novel that fascinates and haunts, and I can't imagine a more perfect author for its subjects. Erin demonstrated a phenomenal perseverance. Her kids often made cameos in our evening classes that only the strongest people can make. I admire everything about her and about this book. Erin?
Well, thanks for making me cry. Thanks, Peter. It's been a hell of a ride. And oh man, I feel like the missing Tuesdays is going to feel like a missing limb for a very long time. So anyway, I thank you all for being here, and I'm just going to jump right in. My novel is told in the first person. It's Marie's voice, and she is in the hospital with an unknown condition. I'm lying down, covered in white hospital blankets, my pregnant belly rising toward the sky like a fresh loaf of bread. The pressure at the top of my head is intense, but I manage to open my eyes and notice my mom standing nearby, her back to the wall. As I'm wheeled away, the last thing I see on her face and her body is worry, which isn't unfamiliar to me. She's crossing her arms in front of her stomach, bracing herself for the next thing. She holds her body like she does when she tries to protect herself from feeling, hugging her ribs, clenching her insides tightly. She stands tucked away, not wanting to be seen, not wanting to take up space, hiding herself from anyone that might actually see her. This is my mother's way of making sure this is not about her, like she learned as a young child to do, because her needs have always been secondary to everything else. My head is pounding, throbbing, feeling like at any moment the very top of it will burst right open. My instinct is to take my cold, clammy hands and put counter pressure at the crown of my head, pressing as hard as I can with my palms, left hand over right, until my shoulders fatigue, trying to force whatever it is that wants to leave my body back down to its rightful place. I'm so fucking cold. I usually run cold, but not like this, not in a teeth chattering kind of way. My cheap gas station sunglasses, the ones I keep in the car just in case, rest over my eyes because the light is unbearable. A nurse is on either side of me, guiding me down a white hallway that goes on for forever, like a lane on a highway, only the dash line is above me. Tile, tile, light, tile, tile, light. The ceiling tiles are too bright, airport white bright, and the fluorescent lights blaze like the center of the sun. I am wincing, my face, my body, I am wincing, and I am bracing myself for the eventual eruption, the culmination of whatever this is. I'm lying here in this forever tunnel on this bed and under these blankets that refuse to keep me warm, not understanding what any of it means. I close my eyes, and in the state of uncertainty, something unequivocal lands, like a flash of lightning, not a feeling, but a deep knowing. And immediately I understand it's here for the sake of my own self-preservation, telling me loud and clear the way I have done things up until now isn't working. I am a ghost draped in white, existing somewhere in the underbelly of the ocean. I imagine my body held by the buoyancy of the sea, moving steadily along with the current. Somehow the temperature of the water matches the temperature of my skin, and something is holding me. Someone is holding me for once. Tears drip down my face, not in fear, but in relief. To feel carried feels like a gift. I can't remember the last time my body felt this well looked after. Someone's hand touches my shoulder. My eyes open with reluctance. I'm still here. I'm still here in life and in the ER. One of the nurses looks right into my eyes with care and tenderness as if I'm a small child. Marie, we are going to start with an MRI to rule out a tumor or brain aneurysm. The nurse's voice trails off, and I find myself in heavy scuba gear in this endless ocean that supports me, but somehow is also weighing me down. I try my hardest to hear what the nurses are saying, but they feel so far away. You will need to be still, they say. 45 minutes, I hear. And just like that, I'm lying on the world's slowest conveyor belt, entering the donut-shaped tomb wearing a hospital gown, a mountain of sterile blankets and oversized headphones. It's as if I'm in the hull of a large container ship, metal grinding against metal, the engine stirring and jarring on and off and on again. This is what it must have sounded like when the Titanic broke in two, twisting, contorting until it reached a point of no return. How terrifying it must have been to be on the ship as it cracked right open. I feel jittery and paranoid, my eyes darting around as I try to get my bearings. I can't see anything. I'm too close and nothing will come into focus. All I can make out is a creamy white color like the enamel of a worn tooth. I have the urge to turn my head to see the source of the terrible banging sounds, but I can't. I'm not supposed to move. My nose itches because a stray hair landed somewhere out of place. I'm feeling irritated now, which makes my head hurt even more. My heart is pounding in my chest. I can't breathe. My head, God damn it, my hands want to reach for the top of my head so badly. But be still, they said. I'm trying to be a good student, trying to control all the signals my body is sending me. Just get the fuck out, it's saying. Just get out. And yet I try to be sensible. This procedure might save your life, Marie. You might want to stick with it. My brain is rooting for me like it always has. You got this, Marie. You're fine. It's 45 minutes. Time must be close to now. Might be close to up by now. Just as I am willing myself to become robot-like, to feel nothing, to hear nothing, a small and distant voice speaks into my ear through a small speaker. You're doing great, Marie. We're about 10 minutes in. And without pause, the remote is growing larger and larger in my hand, swelling, daring me to press the button. It has only been 10 minutes. Panic, panic, panic. All of the alarms in my body are sounding and growing louder by the second. My breath is shallow, so shallow, I'm not sure I'm even breathing. My palms are sweating and I want to rip these blankets off of me. They have wrapped themselves around me, wound themselves too tightly. My sight has gone blurry and the sudden heat is like a campfire too close. When did it get so hot in here? I can feel my heart beating underneath my fingernails. I need to get out of here. How can anyone feel okay lying completely still, not allowing their body to respond to what it needs? My brain, as always, tries to stretch further than it needs to. Marie, you can do this. You've sustained worse things. The circular opening like a mouth is growing smaller, closing in around me, and the light is fading. I just can't. I'm going to burst. And with my thumb, I press down on the button as hard as I can. I need a break. I can't do this, I call out. Are you sure, Marie? We'll have to start again, the voice says. I'm embarrassed for not doing what they expected me to, what they told me to do. Yes, I'm sorry. I need a break. And slowly, I am expelled from the tube, and the cool air on my face feels like a dream.
Fabulous. Aaron, thank you so much. It's impossible not to admire the many qualities that come together in our next novel, written by Leah Christensen, who proved week in and week out that kindness and careful reading go hand in hand. In A Storm You Can Dance In, an unlikely and tortured family reunion in the form of a road trip plays out against the near future, where the America we know has fallen into the disarray of inevitable climate catastrophe. This sounds tragic, and of course it is, but in Leah's thoughtful way, it's not hopeless. And the reason for that is because there will always be love. This is demonstrated in myriad ways in this epic American story, one I suspect you all have the pleasure of reading someday soon. Leah?
Oh, wow. Thank you, Peter. Well, just to echo everybody else, I want to thank Peter again, the Loft, and this cohort. This is such a talented group of writers, and I've learned so much from all of you. Also, huge thanks to my friends and my partner, Jake, who were also patient with me during this past year. I would not have been able to do any of this without your support, and I love you all. So the section that I'm going to read takes place about 3/4 of the way through the book. We pick up with Ray and Nina after Nina's van breaks down in Winnemucca, Nevada, which has been abandoned due to extreme heat and drought. The two women are wandering around the town waiting for the repairman to come. When they reached Winner's Casino, the front door was locked, but Nina soon found an open side door. Ray wasn't a gambler. Didn't life ask you to place enough bets? She had no idea what to expect. Images of Las Vegas, plucked from different movies, flashed through her head. Fountains coughing up chilled water, men in billowy, plunging shirts, women wearing shoes that made her feet hurt just to look at, everything plated in gold. Nuggets of the excess that lured everyone down the road where the entire planet crashed. It was dark inside the casino, except for the dust dancing through the few streams of insistent light leaking through the cracks in the blacked out windows. When their eyes adjusted, the waiting scene was nothing like the Vegas in Ray's mind. Ripped leather seats worn thin from backs and butts dared them to attempt sitting. Poker tables were coated in thick soot. Sad slot machines were still bolted into the ground, displaying shamrocks and women in bikini tops staring blankly across the abandoned floor. Ray was reminded of a haunted maze Tim had taken her to in college called Ghost Town Nightmare Fest. It had been ridiculously campy. She teased Tim about it when they drove home. But then she'd been up for hours after he'd gone to bed, thinking about how insistent those empty spaces were, how loud and prying they might be. Is this a good idea? She whispered to Nina. Probably not, said Nina, pulling the levers on different penny slots. Most did nothing, but a few croaked back, warped, slowed carnival songs that echoed across the casino floor. As the different off-key tunes grated against each other, Ray tried to unclench her jaw. Why was Nina making so much noise? If the repairman was wrong and anyone was here, she didn't want to advertise their presence. Ray had no idea what sort of people stayed in an abandoned town, but her imagination offered nothing good. Where's your sense of self-preservation? Ray asked Nina, hoping there was enough play in her voice. Nina nodded, giving a half smile of recognition at her own admonishment boomeranging back to her. Still, she didn't say anything. The casino smelled like something that had been sealed up for too long. It was still too dark to really see, and the shapes at the far end of the casino looked like they could morph into anything. Monsters, animals, people. Each option scarier than the last. Nina, she said, I'm going outside now. Okay, Nina said in a flat, unbothered voice. Well, I don't think we should split up. Nope, probably not. So will you come with me? Nina didn't respond, continuing to wander between machines, pulling levers and releasing creepy show tunes as she went. Ray felt a flash of frustration. Why wasn't Nina listening? But this was quickly replaced by the realization that Nina probably felt this way about her own behavior most of the time. Nina, she repeated, are you coming? Yep, right behind you. But the brightness outside was no better, illuminating how empty the town was. What if this was what it was going to become everywhere? Ray pushed the thought away. They wandered down Main Street, Nina poking her head into the stores that weren't boarded up. Should we be worried? Ray asked again. What if there are desert people out here? Desert people, Nina repeated. What are desert people? Well, how should I know? Nina swatted her hand through the air as if to bat the idea away. Desert people, she chuckled. Sure, you keep an eye out for the desert people.
Wonderful. Thank you, Leah. Any historical novel worth its weight ought to do, in my opinion, at least two things. The first is reflect the period that it portrays. The second is to let that portrayal amplify the time we live in now. Our penultimate reader tonight does just that in The Life I Wish for You, which chronicles the travails of a contemporary woman who apparently has it all. A beautiful marriage, political influence, a lovely home. But all's not as it seems. And along the way, she looks toward the past to make sense of her own life. It's in that past she finds her ancestors' story, whose immigration from Norway was only the start of her trials. Anne Lowry, the writer of this story, spent the year distinguishing herself as a diligent and determined student. I'm here to tell you tonight that she is now a writer. This book is really smart and poignant, and I can't wait to see it on bookstore shelves someday. Anne?
Thank you, Peter. Just a few thank yous also. First of all, to the Loft for doing this, having this project or this class, it was pretty amazing. And my cohort, not just are you a group of really great writers, but you also are really great human beings. And I really appreciate that. It's been just a joy to be a part of this. And Peter, I could go on and on and on. I reiterate what people have said, just wonderful working with you and your ability to really look at all our different genres and see what, the positives in it has been just great to see. I want to thank also my adult children who smiled when I said I was going to do this, but nonetheless were believers. And my wife, who has put up with, help me with words and help me with plot twists, but also tolerated the times when I've been more in the mind of my book than I have been present to our current life. And so I appreciate that as well. As Peter says, my novel goes between two different time frames. And the piece I want to talk about tonight or read to you tonight is about 2/3 of the way through the book. And it's set in 1934, so it's part of the Marit story. And Mart is working at a tuberculosis mission for indigent families in Arizona who come there to get away, go to the dry, hot climate to help with their TB symptoms. The local residents are not thrilled with the TB mission being there. And so someone has set fire to some of the tents. Mart has befriended a young woman, and just as the fire is burning, the mother of the young woman comes to tell her that she's missing. And so Mart looks for Caroline, is her name, and finds her with 3 young men who happen to have torches that have just been extinguished. So that's when we start the scene. Mart needed no more information. She ran back down the hill to the encampment. The fire had been quelled, and it appeared that about a quarter of the compound had been destroyed. She raced to her tent, which had been spared, and pulled her trunk from behind the cot. She opened it and rummaged to the bottom where she found it, Bobby's gun. She pulled up her dress, tucked the pistol in her breeches, and returned to where she had been seen the automobile. Once there, Mark could see that Caroline was in even more distress. The boy in the red shirt had pinned her against the rusted out blue Chevy. His forced kisses were met with resistance from Caroline. The other boys were laughing and hooting, encouraging him. Marit walked steadily toward the car and heard the red-shirted boy scoff at Caroline. "You are nothing but a Sunny Slope whore, you silly girl. You thought I loved you? Ha, I was only interested in giving you what you deserve." He grabbed Caroline's skirt and began to raise it. Marit paused only for a moment, but then she felt it. The anger she'd packed away like a shameful secret in a locked trunk, but the latch was cracking. Her hand trembled as she pulled the gun from under her dress. She stepped out of the shadows and pointed the gun at the man in the red shirt. Her hand quivered, but not out of fear, out of unbridled rage. It wasn't the whore comment or even the grabbing of Caroline's skirt that jabbed at Marit's fury. It was hearing the words "silly girl." Those were the same words Jorgen used to describe her countless times. The grief, the years of torture in the asylum, the running, the hiding, the fear that Jorgen would find her, it all came back to her in an instant. "Let her go or I will kill you," Marit said. Putting his hands in the air, he stepped away from Caroline and she ran behind Marit. "Caroline, go back to the mission to tell your mother you're safe." Caroline turned and ran. Marit listened to the breaking brush of the arid weeds as it got softer and softer until she knew that the girl was gone. Marit stood with the gun still pointed at the red shirt, but her hand was steady now. She had never felt so simultaneously out of control, yet so completely in control. She saw Jorgen's face in the red shirt face. She remained still, moving only to inhale long, slow, deep breaths. Finally, he broke the silence. "We didn't mean any harm. Just let us go and we'll not come back this way." "It would be best if you didn't talk," said Marit. Should she kill him? Should she let him go? What difference would it make in her life if she took justice into her own hands like John had? His parents suffered because of corrupt men, so he robbed banks to make amends. Marit's life had been dictated by men like this one, the Jorgens of the world. Maybe she would shoot him in the heart and watch him bleed to death on the dry dirt desert floor, a righteous path to cleansing the hatred that poisoned her soul. As Marit pointed the gun at the red shirt, she had a better understanding of John. Maybe homicide is the only regulator of a tormented life, she thought. But then she remembered what John had said after the raid in Wisconsin. "I'm traveling on a one-way road, and I'm not fooling myself as to what the end will be. It's just a question of how much time I have left." Marit cocked the trigger, and then she turned the gun toward the ground. "Get in your car and never, ever come back this way again, and stay away from Caroline. If I hear that you've had any contact with her, I will finish what I started here. Do you understand?" All three nodded and scrambled to the beat-up Chevy. The gears on the car groaned, tires spun, and desert dirt flew behind. They drove away. Marit dropped the gun and fell to her knees. She looked toward the sunset in the western sky, stood, and staggered up the hill step by step. Once at the top, she peered down at the smoldering tents and sat and cried. She cried until darkness approached and the coyotes howled and the desert began to chill. Would she ever have a home? Would she ever feel safe? Would she ever be loved? For the first time in years, she closed her eyes and tried to pray, but her attempt to implore God to help her was met with the screaming voice of doubt. If there's a God, why has he let so many bad things happen to me? What kind of God allows for suffering like this? So instead of praying, she just breathed, and she looked at the sun setting and remembered the story of the phoenix. Could she too be reborn?
Fantastic, Anne. Thank you. Our final reader tonight is an outstanding writer and generous colleague whose enthusiasm this year helped set the tone for the lively conversation that carried us through the writing of these books. Selena Santana has written another book that pushes against conventional genre boundaries. On a Wink from the Sun is many things at once: a family saga, a Vietnam War story, and a coming-of-age story with a hint of magic all come together to deliver an unforgettable story that's as explosive as Mount St. Helens, which burbles in the background of this beautifully written and complex drama. I'd read anything Selena ever wrote, and I think she's a great writer to bring things to a close tonight. Selena, your turn.
Wow, thank you so much. I knew everyone tuning in today would already have a great sense. I trusted my colleagues to really explain everything that we went through this year. So I know you have a good sense of how well we worked together, how much the cohort meant, and of course, our endless appreciation for Peter's guidance. So I'll skip all that and get to it, but big thanks to my family and my husband for their steadfast support. So my literary fiction novel weaves between two characters, Thea Miller and Elon Reed. And for today's reading, I'm going to just introduce you to both of them. So I'll read a brief selection of text from the sections of the novel where each character is introduced. And first, you'll meet Thea. My name is Thea Miller, though I have not yet come to be. I am one of 300,000 oocytes nuzzled inside sacs in the ovaries of my mother. Poor Imogene is unaware. Her hypothalamus has given its command. Her pituitary gland has released its hormones, and my follicle has been triggered to grow. I am maturing, and I can feel my strength against the others. Perhaps it is rude to speak of dominance before one exists, but I know when ovulation comes, I'll be the one to burst through. I am an unwanted shadow, the biggest cell in Imogene's body, as fat as a strand of her hair. I am packed with 500,000 mitochondria that will power my fallopian swim. I have the energy to become a being inside of Imogene that she does not want to be. We got on a bus in Lafayette, Louisiana. We've already traveled Texas for a whole day. We'll meander across New Mexico and Arizona before beginning the climb through California and up until we reach the top edges of the country, up until we reach the top edges of the country and spill into the Salish Sea. We pass Amarillo, Navajo Nation, and the Petrified National Forest. Imogene pees at station stops and nibbles on peanut butter sandwiches wrapped in waxed paper. I feed on luteinizing hormone so I can mature into an otid, my final stage to free myself from follicle and journey down fallopian. Against the bus window, Imogene sleeps a sleep she's never known. She believes she is finally on her own. She believes she is strong enough that she shapes her own path. But I am here, Imogene. You do not journey alone. And now we'll meet Elon. Elon Reed is barely born. His mother begins laboring almost 2 months before term. After 24 hours, the midwife says it must be twins. After 30, it must be dead. His mother pushes on. Anita knows with equal dexterity how to twist a winder stick to taut barbed wire fence, rip and re-sew a hemline, and place lubed arms into the birth canal of a cow to stretch the tissue. I'm still stretching, she says. Elon emerges a color his mother calls jaundice blue, oxygen-deprived skin tinged with yellow. His head is an apple in her palm. His almond-sized toes do not reach the crease of her elbow as they should. He is born into a clan of 7 widows and 5 fatherless children in a sprawling farmhouse in central Ohio. Its 17 rooms tack onto the original structure like extra appendages. The kitchen houses 2 magic chef's gas stoves. The shelves of the library are double or triple stacked. Steamer trunks from immigrant ancestors decorate the bedrooms. The widows raise their children on potato dumplings and self-reliance. And so it is that 14 hands coddle and swaddle baby Elon to full health. Anita reads him everything. Glossy pages of Popular Science and Life magazine, matte novel pages written by Carson McCullers or George Orwell. After a poem by Gwendolyn Brooks, she'll flip over to what other mothers would have considered first, the mouse-like tales of Stuart Little, or the ooh-ow cadence of Goodnight Moon. Good night, nose, she says with a kiss atop Elon's. Good night, toes. He always floats into sleep before the bunny, but she does not stop reading. And when he wakes, she is once again there with a copy of Reader's Digest or a hardbound version of the Audubon Guide to Eastern Land Birds. She might be crooning through the text of the History of Standard Oil when one of the widows admonishes her. Really, Anita, you'll warp the babe's brain with such heavy topics. Anita reads on. Unable to shake her late husband's enthusiasm for osmosis, she applies it to everything. As water may spontaneously pass through a membrane, so too may knowledge, so too may love. In the fall of night, she can see his father's features miniaturized in Elon's face, the same uplift of eyelash, the same dimples that decorate his smile.
I don't know how we could have planned more perfectly. We didn't plan that at all, but to have Selena end with those two brief selections about conception and birth. It is not lost on me that we got together about a year ago with these ideas. And that over the course of the year, we developed those ideas together and with the encouragement and help of each other to give birth to these novels that you've heard so many fabulous excerpts from tonight. It's also notable that we spent this year, we met from 6 until 9 o'clock on Tuesday nights. And whenever 9 o'clock rolled around, I always had to pause in the middle of whatever we were talking about and say, I understand if you have to leave, but we'll continue the conversation. Most of our conversations went a little long this year. And tonight we're done a half hour early. So it's like this full circle coming around. But I want to congratulate each of you. You're, as I said earlier tonight, an inspiration to me. I can't wait to finish reading all of these novels and to continue our conversation about them. And more than anything, I can't wait to the years ahead as our friendships develop, as your friendships develop with each other, and as these books and your writing lives continue to develop. Thanks again to the Loft, to everyone who showed up in support of our writers tonight. And again, and most importantly, to the 11 of you who are here tonight, thanks for a sensational year.